In this lesson, we are going to create an inline splice between two 14 gauge pieces of wire. You could do this with any gauge wire. I just chose 14 gauge because it's bigger, and if you can do 14 gauge, you can usually do smaller gauge. There's different ways you can connect this wire. You can twist it together if you want, like this, and twist it. You can create hooks, hook it together, then solder it. What I choose to do, though, for my inline splice is just kind of mesh them together and then twist it. You'll notice I already stripped them. Usually you have to strip the wire with wire strippers. You strip it back at least 3/4 of an inch, if not an inch, somewhere in between there. Now when I create the splice, I'm just going to kind of force them together, twist them a little bit. Then I'm going to twist them both together. You want to make sure you don't have any wire sticking out, because that can always cause shorts. You want it nice and smooth all the way around. And that's what we're going to solder. I'm going to use the helping hand. I have plenty of these in class, so make sure if you need one that you use one. Now when we solder this, we're going to use our 60/40 gauge wire. I'm sorry, our 60/40 0.03 inch diameter wire. It's got flux internal, it's rosin core. And we're going to use the iron. Now notice the tip. I put a little bit bigger tip on it. Since we're using larger gauge wire, we should have a little bit bigger tip for heat transfer. I could actually have put a little bit bigger tip on there. If we use something like this, if we got really small wire, we can use a much smaller tip. It just depends on the size of the wire. But for 14 gauge, I'm going to use this size tip, a little bit bigger than normal. I wouldn't use this on a printed circuit board or something like that. This would just be for wire. So you'll notice the tip is dirty. It has oxides on it, but after the last time I used it, I put it in the tinner so that oxidation is actually on the tinning. It's not on the tip itself. If I put it in the scrubber, just turn it around a little bit, you can see it shined right up, and that's how we want it when we use it. Now the first thing you got to do is heat up the wire. A good way to do that is you just lightly touch the iron to it, put a few little pieces of solder on there, and you'll see it start to wick in. It's really important to make sure that the solder does wick through the wire. We don't want globs on the outside. We want a good wire connection. We don't want a mechanical connection. We want a electrical connection. Now this is a pretty big piece of wire, so I'm going to go around it. That's good enough. Got a good wire connection. I can see the strands in there, so I know that the solder wicked into the wire, which is what I want it to do. Now I can put the tip back in the holder, but before I put the tip back in the holder, I'm going to clean it. In the scrubber, I could clean it here also. Either way, doesn't matter. Does the same thing. And then I'm going to tin it. I'm going to put that coating on there to protect the tip when it cools down. All right. You'll notice it's wicked through the wire, which is the way we want it. Now, we really don't want bare wire like this. So what we'll normally do is we'll take a piece of shrink tube, and we will put it around it, cover it, make sure it's centered, and then we take a heat gun, and you'll see when I say shrink tube, it shrinks right around the piece of wire. We turn it a little bit, and now we have a good splice to a 14 gauge wire.